Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome KPMG's Andy Cherry.
So, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andy Cherry from KPMG, and we're thrilled once again to sponsor the luncheon portion of this wonderful conference. But truth be told, I almost didn't make it up here. So the story goes, I showed up this morning sporting a sharp, crisp suit and nice, bold tie. Then I crossed paths with Dean Miller, the guy sitting right down there, who told me under no uncertain terms, and I quote, "If you don't change out of that ridiculous outfit, I'm not going to let you get up there and interview Jeff." I've never seen Dean get that mad and animated before. His face was bright red, and he was poking his finger into my chest. So Dean sent me home to change into something a bit more casual, so I blend in a little bit more. So anyway, over the years, the Keynote lunch address has been made by a figure from the sports, media, and entertainment world. This year, we're excited again to have someone who checks all those boxes and who can only be described as an absolute luminary in the business of sports and whose professional success has included player representation and sports team ownership and management. In fact, our guest, Jeff Moorad, has been named to the Sporting News' annual 100 Most Powerful People in Sports on 8 occasions. Jeff grew up in Modesto, California. He received his undergraduate degree in political science from UCLA and his law degree from Villanova University Law School. In 1983, Jeff began specializing in athlete representation. In 1985, he partnered with Lee Steinberg, and the two went on to work 18 years together, negotiating more than $3 billion in athlete contracts for such stars as Steve Young, Troy Aikman, Manny Ramirez, Ivan Rodriguez, Mo Vaughn, and many more.
Show me the money.
Hey, no, show you the money.
Not show you! Show me the money!
Show me the money.
That's it, brother, but you got to yell that shit! Show me the money! Show me the money!
Show me the money. Well, little known fact, or maybe it's a well-known fact, but Jeff and his partner Lee Steinberg were actually the inspiration behind the character Jerry Maguire, and they were the technical consultants for the film. So in 2004, Jeff was named a member of the executive team of the Arizona Diamondbacks and served as general partner and the team's CEO, overseeing the day-to-day operations of the franchise. In 2009, Jeff headed an ownership group that purchased a 50% stake in the San Diego Padres. In conjunction with that transaction, Jeff was named vice chairman and CEO of the club, roles he filled until 2012. On the business side, Jeff serves as chairman and CEO of Morehead Sports Partners, an investment management company he co-founded in 2013 with sports industry legend Peter Ueberroth, and as chairman of the Carlyle Group portfolio company Prime Sport. Jeff's success also goes into the communities he serves. Jeff strongly believes in and supports community giving and outreach. Leading by example, he endowed a baseball scholarship at his alma mater, UCLA, and made a substantial gift for the Jeffrey S. Moorad Center for the Study of Sports Law at Villanova. Jeff recently joined Morgan Lewis, where he serves as chairman of the firm's Global Sports Industry Initiative. Please join me in welcoming Jeff Moorad. Jeff, great to have you here.
Thank you. Andy.
Welcome back to the East Coast, the greatest sports town in America with the most passionate fans, Philadelphia.
But how do you really feel?
So, again, thanks for coming. So the first two questions are going to be kind of entrepreneurial focused. So we have an audience filled with entrepreneurs who are trying to raise money to help develop and commercialize their product or service and really to live out their entrepreneurial dream. Many of these folks have started out in a business incubator or an innovation lab. Over the past few years, a few sports teams, including the LA Dodgers and the Philadelphia 76ers, have established these types of programs to help young companies with strategy, growth, and financing. So could you talk a little bit about why sports teams are embarking on these initiatives and the impact they're having in assisting early stage businesses and entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. You know, as I think about a sports team, and I know as we always approach the communities that we did business in, you know, we thought of ourselves as a community-owned business in many respects, almost like a community trust. And if you think about it that way, the idea of becoming a platform for entrepreneurs who are developing businesses, especially those that touch sports, especially the particular sport that a team's involved in, it makes sense to allow for, you know, some mechanism to allow those in the community to, you know, to just feel a bit more of that particular team's world. And I think as you look at some of the successes that have already occurred, you know, a la Dodgers, a la Sixers, as you mentioned, you know, let alone other teams around the country, you know, it's a little bit of the, you know, kind of the approach that, you know, teams are choosing to, you know, just as a mechanism to get into the communities more. And I think, you know, look, I've been closer to the Dodgers effort out west. Peter Guber, who's one of their co-owners, is a real entrepreneurial, a serial entrepreneur. And he's encouraged the Guggenheim folks to get involved in that type of effort. And one of my former clients, Sean Green, who played for the Dodgers for a number of years, actually started a company called Greenfly. It's his third technology company that he's started since he retired from baseball after a 16-year career. And Greenfly has been funded in part by the Dodgers incubator. And I happen to know they wrote a 7-figure check because I'm an investor as well. And you know, that's the kind of company that's involved in sports. Greenfly is a video company that allows the LeBron James of the world to use his cell phone, you know, record an 8-second clip and send it to Greenfly, who then distributes it to wherever you know, the appropriate place is. So the bet he made on the World Series last year, for example, with Dwayne Wade, was recorded on Greenfly technology.
Great, thanks. So I mentioned in my introduction, Jeff, your firm, Moorad Sports Partners, that invests in and manages sports-related businesses. So could you talk about an investment or two and the market opportunity that particular business is capitalizing on?
Sure. Probably a couple that would be interesting. One, we just closed the deal. My partner, Rich Aldrich, sitting out in the audience, I had a chance to get to know it a little. We bought a tennis facility, or at least control of a tennis facility in South Carolina, and they play a women's tennis tour event at the facility. We'll also create a concert venue. It's a 10,000-seater that is a pretty special venue, and we saw the opportunity to bring some sports industry experience as well as a venue management experience to the mix. The facility is called the Family Circle Tennis Center, and it was Family Circle because it was a property that they sponsored through Meredith Broadcasting. And Meredith controlled the facility but didn't feel like they had the expertise to run it properly, reached out for a partner. We stepped in. They kept 30% of the deal, and we now have control of the facility for the next 30 years. And it's something that you know, we're excited about. Probably the other investment that comes to mind would be Prime Sport. As you mentioned, I'm chairman of the company. We bought Prime Sport about 3 years ago. with the Carlyle Group, and it's a Carlyle Group portfolio company. I brought a partner, Steve Ross, who's the owner of the Miami Dolphins, and we all invested into this company. We bought control and in fact added a Philadelphia component in the last year. We bought a company called CID Entertainment, who some of you may know, and they, both CID on the music side and Prime Sport on the sports side specializes in creating VIP experiences. We're this official partner to probably 150 different events around the country, events, teams, leagues, and the like. The NCAA Final Four, for example. We do 8,500 Super Bowl tickets typically, a couple thousand Masters badges each day in Augusta, and packaging, kind of backstage access to music concerts, which CID specializes in, is a fun part of the business. So again, another example.
Okay. So you started representing athletes in 1983 when the average NFL salary was in the low six figures and the average baseball salary was in the mid six figures. From 1983 until now, TV rights have skyrocketed, expensive stadiums have been built, football was forced into free agency, and sports leagues instituted salary caps to ensure parity and to make sure the owners didn't go broke. Could you talk about how the economics of sports have evolved over the last few decades and some of the key factors that have made sports leagues wildly successful, and in particular from a financial perspective?
Well, that's a loaded question. No doubt you hit on the main one, and that's the broadcast revenues. TV revenues have indeed changed the sports landscape over the last 25 years. As I think back to the significant changes in sport, they almost always flow from the revenues and the significant revenues in the different sports. Football, of course, has become an unbelievably popular TV game. In particular, of course, there's 60,000 fans a week that go out and watch their local teams, but the ability to watch any game at any time on DirecTV, pretty much transformed the NFL and created a revenue base in that league that has been an absolute amazing thing in terms of the success of the league, and that revenue has trickled down to the players, through its salary cap system that they negotiated with the owners. See, I was lucky. I was in baseball where we didn't have a salary cap, and that favored. Everybody said, "Oh my God, that means the large market teams could outspend the smaller market teams." I said, "Well," I look at it a little differently. I think the lack of a salary cap allowed for the smarter teams, albeit in the smaller or mid-sized markets, to actually to execute. They gave them an opportunity to execute better. And if you could out-execute some of those larger market teams, it didn't matter what they were spending, you could still challenge them and compete with them. And indeed in Arizona, my first couple of years there, we put together a foundation, much like John Middleton has done here in Philadelphia over the last few years. We built a foundation that allowed us, even on a mid-market payroll, to win the division in 2007. Actually have the best record in the National League. So the amount of money wasn't necessarily what allowed for our success there. But again, that having been said, TV revenues really changed the landscape of the industry. Also, the industry as a whole, Andy, is much different today. I mean, I don't know that I would have recognized it 30 years ago when I first stepped into it. But today, I mean, sports is almost a $70 billion industry on an annual basis, in the upper 60s this year, and expected to cross 70 in the next couple of years. And that's a stunningly large industry compared to what it once was as a little bit of a cottage industry with a bunch of teams that played each other and hoped to make money.
Got it. So you represented professional athletes from 1983 until the mid-2000s when you became CEO of the Diamondbacks. So you started out on the labor side trying to extract every dollar you could from management and then switched to the management side where your goal was to minimize salaries. Could you talk about some of the more interesting negotiations you were involved in over the years and how your skills as a labor negotiator helped you when you negotiated for management?
Yeah, Andy doesn't pull any punches. Great question. I mean, look, I love the work on both sides. I never thought about being a labor negotiator when I represented players, but I suppose, that's what I was. I was, the pride that I got from the business all stemmed from the actual work. It was, obviously we had great players. We had, over the years, I think we negotiated something like, 45 first-round contracts in the NFL, probably a similar number in Major League Baseball, first-round contracts, and we had some great clients. At one point, we had 25 quarterbacks in the NFL. Aikman, Moon, Young were kind of the best known, but it was a deep group. I mean, from Bledsoe to Ken O'Brien to, a long list, and being in position to do those deals was what allowed us to occasionally gain some acclaim from our negotiation work. So we were really a function of who our clients were, and that's what allowed our firm to succeed. My focus, as I mentioned, was on, sure, it was maximizing dollars back in those days, but it was a bit of the art of the deal. It was, I was interested in not only, getting as much, for our players as we could, but I also knew that at the end of the contract negotiation, those players had to walk in and play for the people on the other side of the table. So I wasn't a guy who banged my fist on the table or, screamed and yelled, and plenty did, believe me. But I tried to take a more reasoned approach and tried to, use data, even back in the day when data and metrics weren't, the buzz terms that they are today. We put together packets and exhibits and tried to present a logical way of thinking about a particular player's, ultimate compensation package. And we tried to do it in a way that didn't offend the other side. They didn't always agree with us, but in fact, Tom Hicks, my good friend who owned the Texas Rangers and the Dallas Stars, still teases me because after he signed Alex Rodriguez for $250 million, I had the enviable task of representing Pudge Rodriguez. His All-Star just had won the MVP award and now Hall of Fame catcher. And so I went and met with Tom and asked him for $275 million. And he said, I still remember when you had the gall to ask me for, I said, Tom, come on, like, what am I supposed to do? Put yourself in my position. He's like, yeah, I guess you had to. And eventually we got a deal done for 45. So, like I said, didn't always work out exactly as we wanted, but lesser years, mind you, but 45 was still a lot of money. But moving over to the team side, which I did really by choice, and I just a moment on that. I love the work representing players, and I still have many friends who I worked with over the years who are still involved in the various sports, football and baseball in particular. As a matter of fact, one of my former clients is A.J. Hinch, who I'm very proud of, now has a World Series ring to wear on his finger. And as the manager of the Astros, I was excited to see him get the win last night. But I got tired of the derivative role of the agent, and I aspired, maybe like many in this room, to be more of a principal. And rather than play just the derivative role of the agent, I was interested in becoming, someone who had a real say in the business. And as a result, the only path that made sense was to change sides and move to the management side. I had an opportunity to do that and also to become an owner, and that's something I jumped at. And on the other side of the aisle, it's much, or maybe I should say the table. It's much less about trying to get players for as little as you can, as it is of fitting players into a particular budget. And I used to tell my general manager in Arizona and in San Diego, look, at the end of the day, it's your choice who you sign. I mean, I'm not a talent evaluator. I'm not going to tell you, that this player is better than the next one. But I will tell you, at the end of the day, you need to be accountable to a bottom line budget. So if you can, you construct your budget however you choose to, it's your choice. Now, occasionally, they'd let me do a negotiation or two. And I used to say, look, give me one a year, right? Choose a tough agent or choose somebody, that you really would prefer somebody else to do, and I'll do it, and I'll have a little fun with it. And I had familiarity with what the agent's role was and understood that they might have to ask for $275 and walk away with $45. So I kind of understood the psychology, and occasionally, like I said, once a year or something, I'd have a little fun and do that. But other than that, it was really the GM's responsibility to negotiate deals that made sense for us.
Great. So the first athlete to really capitalize on and monetize his brand and generate ancillary income was Arnold Palmer back in the 1960s. And he did it with the help of his agent, Mark McCormick. And Arnold was the all-American boy and used his image to build a fortune. So could you talk about the importance of athletes developing their brands, and most important, with the examples of Lance Armstrong, Tiger Woods, and O.J. Simpson, how that brand can become tarnished and how the corresponding revenue stream vanishes overnight if the athlete, say, crashes his Escalade into a fire hydrant or somehow goes off some other type of train wreck?
Yeah, look, every athlete today wants to be a brand. I mean, that's kind of a premise that I think you have to accept in the industry. I mean, we have sports as a star-making mechanism in and of itself. It's a celebrity making business, and whether it be for the players, for the owners, for the GMs, other members of the team. I mean, it's a celebrity making opportunity, and unfortunately today, in my opinion, these young players are surrounded by would-be agents, financial advisors, marketing folks who consider themselves expert at sports marketing, and they all encourage this idea of look, you should have a foundation, you should become a star, you need to have your own shoe. Well, look, there aren't that many players who are really worthy of having their own shoe, for example. The Steph Currys and Kobe Bryants of the world are, few and far between. But, as you think back to the Arnold Palmer and Jack Nicklaus roots, you're right. I mean, the idea of, crafting a marketing strategy and a path for an athlete to, create a brand for himself or in some cases for herself is now kind of the thing to do. And its roots are indeed with the IMG model that Mark McCormick created for Arnold Palmer and others back in the day. But today, the problem I have with it is, not only does it create this amazing expectation level, in the different communities that athletes play with the fan base, it holds the athletes up to an incredibly high standard as they, create a foundation with a charitable cause and the like, and it does make them susceptible to a mistake or susceptible to, a bad decision or the like, and. I'm not saying you stay away from those things because you don't want the higher standard, but I'm not sure that the athletes really understand what it all means. As opposed to like, hey, I'm cool, I got a foundation, versus having a foundation that does real good in the world, Steve Young had a foundation called the Forever Young Foundation that built hospital wings and provided incredible benefits to kids who were cancer patients around the world. Troy Aikman did a similar thing in Dallas. And those are great things to do. But I question whether the natural instinct of, well, I got to have a foundation, I need my sports marketing people, I need my financial advisor. It's like, you know what? Go succeed on the field or on the court or on the ice, and go get it done there. And these things will flow naturally if you do it right. If you perfect your craft in the right way, all those opportunities will come. I just think that athletes are making a mistake putting some of those things ahead of the actual success or in the sport that they're paid to play.
So last week, 49% interest in the New York Nets were sold, which valued the team at $2.3 billion. And a few weeks before that, an ailing franchise, the Florida Marlins, were sold for $1.2 billion. Is there any limit in sight to the value of sports teams and what someone or multiple people would be willing to pay?
And the Houston Rockets are sold for $2.2 billion. And remember that 49% interest in New Jersey was for a minority position. So you could certainly argue that there was some discount applied to that sale. And I would argue that the value of that franchise was probably closer to $3 billion. Your question's a valid one. Is there an end in sight? I'm not sure. I mean, somebody told me years ago, if you ever have an opportunity to invest in a legal monopoly, do it all day long. And what are sports teams? But they're all parts of legal monopolies, right? The NFL has 32 teams, and it's pretty hard to go create the 33rd. In fact, you're not going to have anybody to play unless you happen to create a whole nother league. But think about the uphill battle that's involved in that as you contemplate it. Similarly, in baseball, there are 30 clubs. That's it. And the fact is that if you own one of those clubs, it's a supply and demand quotient. And all of you in the room who understand what it's like to start businesses and be part of growing businesses, you understand that it's one thing to have competition. It's another to have a limit on competition, and to have, as these leagues do, the ability to compete amongst themselves, to sell their rights as a league, and to monopolize, a particular sport. So as a result, if you're looking to invest, my view is, as long as the revenues support it, not necessarily profit. Some teams are profitable, some aren't. Different ownership groups choose to run teams in particular manners. Some choose to make money, and most don't. Some choose to actually run a team as a loss leader. But in my opinion, because of the fact that at the end of the day on exit, you can almost always, with the exception of a few hockey teams over time, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a sports team over the last 15 years that hasn't escalated in value in the marketplace. So, look, every time there's a new transaction, most recently in baseball, it was the Marlins, everybody in the league says, oh my gosh, well, I'm better than Florida, so, I must be worth $2 billion. And, it's funny how these sales have a way of, much like in the player market, the right fielder of a particular club gets a big contract, and 5 other right fielders in baseball say, well, wait a minute, I'm better than he is, so I ought to get more money than him. It's no different in the ownership ranks. So that, when Buffalo sells for $1.4 billion, I promise you there were NFL owners all over the league who celebrated because they knew that Buffalo was generally considered at the bottom of the heap in the NFL, along with Jacksonville, with all due respect to anybody from either. But every owner said, well, wait a minute, we're not Buffalo, So, the Jerry Jones of the world started thinking, well, look, how much can we extrapolate from there? Are the Cowboys worth 3.5, 4, maybe 5 billion? If so, what are the New York Giants worth? Et cetera, et cetera. So, it's the call it the greater fool theory. There'll always be another billionaire who, is likely to want to get involved. I know there's a long line to get involved with the NFL today, and I think as baseball's become hotter and more popular, and there haven't been many franchises that have traded hands in baseball. There's now a good amount of buyers for baseball teams, let alone basketball, probably a little less in hockey, but if there are any buyers, they're probably in markets like this one.
So on the topic of the NFL, it's an absolute financial juggernaut, and the league basically prints money. However, the league's taken some hits with concussion issues, the on and off suspensions of Tom Brady and Ezekiel Elliott, domestic violence problems, and national anthem protests. So if I was Roger Goodell and this was a private meeting, what advice would you be giving me, taking into account there's at least one owner that's trying to stall my contract extension?
Well, first of all, I don't think you can worry about, if you're Roger, I don't think you can worry about, whoever's trying to, figure out who the next commissioner is going to be. There's always some thought along those lines. But, as a commissioner, look, your responsibility is to the owners in your league. And, he's got 32 owners that are essentially his board of directors, and that's who he works for. If I wouldn't tell Goodell anything he doesn't know, I'm sure, but you can only solve these problems one at a time. You've got to take them in. The concussion issue isn't going to go away. It's a problem that the game has, in my opinion, going forward. And how they're going to challenge it, I don't know. I mean, it's not just an NFL problem. There's a challenge to youth football and college football, let alone the NFL. And how there's new technology. Maybe some in the room are even familiar with some of the technologies that are being developed, but they're new technologies designed to lessen the concussion impact of the helmet-to-helmet contact. At the end of the day, can you do that in a meaningful way? I'm not sure. I mean, I know I have 3 sons, and I certainly preferred that they not play football, although I spent 20 years of my life representing NFL players. I became pretty sensitive to the NFL, or to the concussion issue, mostly through Steve Young and Troy Aikman, who both retired because of effects of concussion. Thankfully, both are healthy, and they both have successful broadcasting careers, but I'll tell you, I sat in hospital rooms with both of them over the years and listened to them, talk about things that made no sense. And it was a pretty scary reality. So that's a real problem that's not going to go away. In terms of player protests, that's a challenge. And it's a real challenge for Roger. It's a real challenge for the league. I'm not sure what the solution is. I think that in retrospect, the league probably acted too slowly. They didn't come out with a strong point of view. Rather, they let the issue develop and evolve. And now it's become a real policy issue as to how you handle it going forward. I'm not sure what the right answer is. I know baseball did their part of in probably striking back and trying to honor people appropriately and certainly not let anything get in the way of the national anthem. I'm not sure the players really intended the political statement that they made regarding the national anthem. I think that it's clear that they had a statement that they wanted to make, and I certainly respect and honor and appreciate their right to do that. I don't know that they meant it as an unpatriotic gesture. And, I think the league's let it get out of hand at this point, and I worry about it, frankly.
So kind of along those lines, the topic is Colin Kaepernick. So in your professional judgment and opinion, Is the reason why he's not currently on a roster is because he isn't good enough, or the owners don't need the distraction or controversy that would undoubtedly accompany his presence? Or maybe it's a combination of the two.
You know, that's a good question, Andy. I mean, I can only give, you know, what my impression would be. And over the years, I mean, I had, you know, my general manager would come to me with, you know, the thought of signing a controversial player or a player who had somehow been involved in a controversy. Maybe it was a player who formerly used steroids, for example, and asked, you know, what my thoughts were. And I always said, look, I mean, we have to strike a balance between, you know, getting the best talent that we can and also, you know, maintaining this public trust concept that, you know, we're operating this team as a, you know, as a part of the community. So, you know, do we want a distraction that's going to, you know, be problematic for the club or for the club's chemistry? You know, it wasn't always an easy answer, but you know, I think that's probably what's going on with Kaepernick. You know, I don't know. I haven't talked to any owners directly about it. I will tell you, you know, I don't know why he was released on the front end, but I've never met a player, back to my player representation days, I've never met a player who was released or cut or let go who didn't believe there was some level of conspiracy as to why he couldn't get another job. Now, I agree that this one's a little more dramatic, and there may actually be some reasons, like teams prefer to just stay away, but I can't imagine that there's an actual conspiracy suggesting that owners are, you know, talking to each other and saying, hey, let's make sure we don't sign him. They each make their own business decisions, and believe me, they're all competitive enough that if they felt there was enough talent justification, they'd go ahead and sign him. We've seen it happen over the years, you know, with all sorts of players. Michael Vick, right in this market, is a perfect example.
Right. So over the weekend, there was a Wall Street Journal article about the IMG Academy, an elite for-profit boarding school for high school athletes and the leading producer of top college and NFL prospects. It talked about how parents are paying significant money for their kids to go there with the hopes that they'll get an athletic scholarship and perhaps become a professional athlete. Now, we all know that a small percentage of kids actually become pro athletes, and sometimes the parents get a little overzealous in their pursuit of success for their kid. So we have a lot of parents in this audience whose kids are young athletes. So what advice would you give them regarding their expectations about their youngster moving to the next level?
So we invested in a company at Morehead Sports called U.S. Sports Camps, and maybe some of you have either attended our camps or had your kids attend. We have 650 camps around the country that are all affiliated with colleges and college coaches of various sports. So whether it's the Stanford tennis camp or the Williams College lacrosse camp and kind of everything in between, these are camps that we maintain across the country. You know, the revenue model is pretty straightforward. The college coach takes a third of the action. The universities take a third for, you know, allowing us to use their venues, and we take a third for the back-end administration of the camps. And you know, this past summer we put 102,000 kids through our camps. You know, they're not inexpensive. You know, they're what I would consider to be a bit of a luxury for a kid, but parents pay the price, and they do it for the same reason that they're sending their kids to an IMG academy, because they're looking for the kid to, you know, get the most out of their athletic experience. Now that in and of itself, you know, totally understandable. The idea that, you know, a great number of those kids are going to end up being professional athletes is a bit of fantasy. And look, I used to, you know, when I coached my own boys on the Little League fields in Newport Beach, California, you know, I had parents come up to me often. They say, "Oh, well, you're involved in baseball, so you know how many, you know, so-and-so is going to be, you know, I think he may be a major league player, and this guy." And I used to tell these parents, they probably didn't like it, but I said, you know what? I'm the most realistic father on the Little League field, And believe me, not many of them are going to be major league players, maybe none. And certainly not my kids, because it's not in the bloodlines. But the fact is, look, there's nothing wrong with encouraging, there's nothing wrong with, even funding, the opportunities that some have. And obviously, there are some kids who are going to grow up and become professional ball players of some kind. And I think it's a great thing. It's a great dream to chase. The only advice I would give is make sure they maintain their academics, make sure they stay balanced, and make sure they don't put all of their eggs into that basket and think that they're, because they're passionate about it, that they're likely going to become a professional player. The odds are against them, quite frankly.
So you've been a top flight agent, owner and CEO of multiple sports teams, a successful businessman, and an inspiration to the Jerry Maguire character, and a from-the-heart philanthropist. Now you're a partner in an international law firm. Even with a great and nimble firm like Morgan Lewis and partners like Bodel and Hamilton, are we talking about culture shock here?
Yeah. Yeah, we are. No, you know what? Look, whether it's a global law firm, whether it's KPMG, whether it's any business, we're all a function of the people involved. And I kid Rich Aldrich because I like to kid him, but the fact is that he epitomizes the kind of partner that I have now at Morgan Lewis. And the fact is, it's about the quality of the people involved. And just as all of your businesses, whether startup or something more mature, the fact is that every person you hire reflects your brand and reflects who you are. And as I look at Morgan Lewis, I see a chair who I actually went to law school with, Jamie McKeon, who really sets by example. She's an incredible role model as a lawyer and a business person running a 1,900 lawyer law firm that has 30 offices around the world. And it's been a really impressive thing for me. I was sharing with Mike Marson, my law school classmate, a few minutes ago. We remember Jamie as a law student, and she was always smarter than the rest of us, but I didn't know she had the business skills that I've witnessed at Morgan Lewis. So for me, it's been a really fun way to kind of be a senior person at a law firm. I'm a little bit of a non-traditional fit, but I love bringing a little extra business expertise to the firm, a business perspective that maybe not all the lawyers have, or you'd expect to have because they haven't been involved in it over the years. But for me, it's a great fit, and I'm thrilled to be part of the firm and excited to be back in Philadelphia.
So a few weeks ago, college basketball was rocked by a scandal involving corruption and bribery in recruiting practices. And the situation involved recruits at the University of Louisville and Adidas, a global sports apparel brand. And although he wasn't named in the FBI's findings, Louisville's basketball coach, Rick Pitino, was fired, even though he emphatically denied any involvement. So what do you think really happened here? And how do these scandals get so out of control and involve titans of the industry and well-known, high-paid coaches?
Well, look, I don't know any of the specifics involving, the allegations at Louisville or elsewhere. But what I do know is the AAU basketball world, generally has been perceived as dirty for a lot of years. I won't say I was shocked when I read that the FBI had gotten involved and is trying to figure out how to clean up that particular industry. There's kind of this undercurrent in college basketball that exists in the form of these amateur basketball leagues, and the promoters of those leagues are infamous for having their hand out and doing deals for Final Four tickets and all sorts of things. And it's kind of people in the business, I think, had a general awareness. I don't know how specific it was, but even, as an agent over the years, I always had some sense that that's one reason we stayed away from basketball, quite frankly, because it was just, it was a more challenging sport to do business in. And the same people that had their hands out to the college programs had their hands out to the agents. And, that's all I'll say because I don't know much more. But like I said, it's a reason why we stayed away from basketball.
So from a philanthropic perspective, you've endowed a baseball scholarship at UCLA, made a substantial gift to Villanova to establish the Jeffrey S. Moorad Center for the Study of Sports Law, and have been active in raising funds for ALS in honor of your friend Augie Nieto. So could you talk about the importance of philanthropy and its impact it's had on your personal and professional life?
Yeah, look, when Lee Steinberg and I ran our agency, we had a requirement that our athletes retrace their roots and give back to their communities in some form. Sometimes that was dollars, and sometimes it was time and contribution to charity and in other ways. But we encouraged programs around the country that, and frankly, we did it because we believed that it was partly the athlete's responsibility to give something back to the communities that he was part of. So whether it be, retracing their roots and, giving money to their high schools or paying back their college scholarships, or even getting involved in their professional communities, we thought that all that was just a little bit of a quid pro quo for some of the riches that they achieved by and the benefits that they achieved by playing their sport. So Lee and I also tried to follow suit and to give back in our own ways. I chose the schools that I've been involved with, and as you mentioned, Andy, have spent a good amount of time raising money for ALS research. I'm happy to say that we have a couple drugs in development which have already shown that they can slow the disease. Will it ultimately cure it? Not sure, but we really believe that we've made an impact in the ALS world, and that's really important to me.
Great. So I have about 93 more questions for you, but I don't want to monopolize your time. So I think we have time, 2 questions from the audience, Dean? Okay.
If any.
If any. Yeah, over there.
Jeff, what's your take on Lonzo Ball and how he kind of, maybe how he markets his style? I mean, if he was your client, how would you handle that?
Well, if he was my client, I'd get rid of his dad. But I don't know that I'd have an option to do that. Look, I'm a UCLA guy, so I watched him play out at UCLA. I'm sorry to say only one season. Not a big fan of the one and done rule in college basketball, or at least what's become that. Look, it goes back to the answer I gave earlier. I think that whether it's Lonzo Ball or any other athlete, they ought to worry about succeeding on the court first, and not so much about crafting the brand or maintaining the the billion-dollar enterprise that the dad foresees. I mean, I think it's all a little over the top. That's the way I view it. But, I'm also an old guy, probably not sensitive enough to the young kid. But that's how I'd view it.
Back there.
What was the first part of the, you said that you had an experience with him? Oh, got it. Yeah. So Scott and I competed against each other on 21 first-round draft picks over the years, and I'm happy to say that I won 18 of them. He was real glad the day I retired from the business. That having been said, if I had a kid today, I'd have to consider hiring him. Now, I don't know if I would at the end of the day, but in terms of ability to deliver top dollar, he's shown an incredible track record to be able to do just that. Stylistically, he was very different than I was. In fact, I'll tell you one quick story. We competed, again, I mean, these battles were epic. And the irony is we both lived in Newport Beach. We both had our offices in Newport. I don't know how we both ended up there, but you know, I used to, you know, try to be friendly to him, and one time he told me, he's like, Jeff, I just don't talk to my competitors. Okay, you know, do your own thing, Scott, that's fine. But we were competing against each other for a first-round draft pick in Las Vegas, and I still remember the kid. He was the 10th pick in the '95 draft, named Chad Hermanson. He was a shortstop, and he decided he was going to sign out of high school, Valley High in Vegas, and so Scott, you know, went in the house early, and I found out later that he had taken Greg Maddux in with him, and I'm like, oh my God, you know, like how am I going to compete with Greg Maddux? But there was a funny component to the story. When the mother was telling me about it, she said, you know, we really liked Scott. He was a really smart guy. But we'll be honest, we found it really hard to concentrate on Scott with Greg Maddux sitting in our living room. And so I kind of chuckled to myself. I thought, how am I going to combat this? And so during my meeting with them, I realized that they were an LDS family, a Mormon family. And so, all right, I got it. And on the way to the airport, I called Steve Young and said, here's a number and a name. I'd love you to call this kid and give him a little perspective. And when they got a call from Steve Young, the battle was over. So
That's awesome.
it worked out well. But you know, look, Scott had a style that was, you know, all about banging his fist on the table. It was very different than me. There was a pretty dramatic contrast between the two. I refused to ever say anything negative about Scott in a competitive situation. And I once told a father that, and he said, well, that's funny, because he's not afraid to say anything negative about you. But the fact is, you know, look, I always believe there's different styles. When I moved to the ownership side, we drafted one of his players in one of the early drafts in Arizona, and it was Max Scherzer. And, you know, when Max debuted in Arizona, I still remember sitting with his college athletic director from the University of Missouri, and I invited Scott to sit with us too, because I promise you, at that stage, no owner was inviting Scott to be part of any kind of social or, you know, let alone a public situation. And I knew what it was like, you know, again, to play that derivative role. And so, you know, I invited Scott. I said, hey, you're welcome to sit with me, and you know, let's watch your client. And little did we know he'd be as good as he turned out to be. But so anyway, again, different styles for different folks. In terms of bottom line results, like I said, you know, look, J.D. Drew ended up not signing in Philadelphia because of Scott. I came in the next year with Pat Burrell as a client, and let's just say we smoothly got a deal done. And you know, there's an argument that Scott did the dirty work for us, and we were able to maximize Burrell's contract as a result. But again, different strokes for different folks.
So Jeff, thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate it. That was great.
Thank you. Thank you, Andy.
Thanks.
Thanks again to Jeff and to Andy and KPMG for presenting the keynote lunch. We're back at it in the rooms downstairs for the round 2 of the company presentations. And we also have a new feature this year coming up with reverse pitches that I really recommend that you attend. I think everyone will benefit from it. And then it will be culminated with Line Sten and then the gala, so enjoy.